April 7th, 2022. Copperas Cove, Texas. Just after noon, a quiet residential street is interrupted by the sound of gunfire. Minutes later, police arrive at the scene and find a 33-year-old woman lying motionless inside her home. She's been shot multiple times. Her name is Destiney Jassmund Carey, a licensed nurse, a mother of 6, and a woman recently separated from her partner. By the time paramedics get there, it's already too late. She's pronounced dead at the scene. The suspect? Her ex-husband, a man named Kelvin. There are no signs of forced entry. No evidence of a struggle. Just a cold, calculated act carried out in the middle of the day. Within moments, 6 children are left without a mother. A family is destroyed, and the alleged killer disappears. This wasn't a robbery. This wasn't random. This was personal.
The woman who was shot dead in Copperas Cove yesterday in the afternoon is when this took place. Police identified her as 33-year-old Destiney Carey.
Carey was a clean business owner and a mother of 6. Understandably, her family is devastated.
What happened behind the closed doors of that house? What history existed between Destiney and Kelvin that led to this moment? And why did no one intervene before it turned fatal? As the investigation unfolds, a larger pattern comes into focus. One that repeats itself in city after city. Intimate partner violence, ignored warnings, easy access to firearms, and victims who don't survive long enough to be heard. There are questions the police never answered, gaps in the media coverage, and one critical fact. The person who pulled the trigger was someone she once trusted. This is a case of Destiney Jassmund Carey, a nurse, a mother, and another woman added to the long list of domestic homicide victims. Stay with us as we unravel this shocking story and uncover the heartbreaking details of what led to this senseless loss. If you enjoy real crime stories that uncover the truth, don't forget to subscribe. Your support helps us share real cases, spread awareness, and give a voice to those who can't speak for themselves. Before we begin, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? And what are your thoughts as the story unfolds? Welcome to True Crime Tales, where we reveal the crimes that shock communities and the secrets hidden behind closed doors. These are real people, real events, real consequences. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Now let's begin. Destiney Jassmund Carey was 33 years old at the time of her death. She was a licensed nurse, a profession that requires discipline, emotional control, and significant training. Her work involved long shifts and constant interaction with patients, often in high-pressure environments. This alone made her life demanding. But outside her job, she carried an even greater responsibility, raising 6 children. Destiney was originally from Little Rock, Arkansas. Records and social media indicate she later moved to Texas, eventually settling in Copperas Cove, a small city located between Killeen and Lampasas. While details about her early life remain limited, her digital footprint shows a woman dedicated to survival and stability. She didn't seek attention. She didn't broadcast drama. Her online posts reflected perseverance, focus on her kids, and silent strength. Publicly, Destiney was known in her community as both hardworking and private. She wasn't the type to openly discuss personal issues. However, those close to her noticed signs of strain behind her composed appearance. On her Facebook page, she occasionally shared inspirational quotes, scripture verses, or status updates about motherhood. She rarely mentioned her partner by name, but there were signs of personal battles. It was clear she was trying to stay strong while holding her world together. Despite raising 6 children, a job that most would find overwhelming, Destiney worked to create normalcy. Reports suggest she didn't rely heavily on others for support. Friends describe her as always busy, and neighbors noted that she kept to herself, often moving between work, home, and her children's schools. There was no documented history of criminal activity or drug use. She was not involved in gangs or street-level conflicts. She lived a quiet life, centered around her family and work. Destiney's story reflects a pattern seen in many domestic violence cases. She was a mother, a nurse, and a member of the community. But none of those roles shielded her from the dangers inside her own home. There is no indication she ever received the kind of public attention or protective infrastructure that some high-risk victims do. Her life was mostly invisible to the system until her murder made her visible. What a society of women like Destiney who juggle multiple roles while surviving dangerous relationships behind closed doors. The man identified as her killer is Kelvin, believed to be her ex-husband or ex-partner. His full name has not been released in official public records, but multiple sources, including local news outlets and social media discussions, identify him as the father of at least some of Destiney's children. Kelvin and Destiney had a long-standing relationship, though details about when began or ended remain unclear. What is evident is that the relationship was unstable. Neighbors and online sources suggest a history of conflict between the two. There is suspicion of past verbal abuse, emotional manipulation, and possessive behavior by Kelvin. These suspicions have not been formally confirmed in police documents, but the signs of an abusive dynamic were reportedly present. Multiple sources have hinted that Destiney was trying to distance herself from Kelvin in the months leading up to her death. She may have moved to a different residence or refused to allow him back into her life. There are rumors she sought legal protection, possibly in the form of a restraining or protective order. However, there is no confirmed public record of such an order at this time. This raises questions about the accessibility of protection services in cases where the threat is intimate and ongoing. Kelvin is described by acquaintances as controlling and often dismissive of Destiney's independence. Some allege that he would monitor her activities and try to influence her decisions, particularly regarding who she spoke to or where she went. It's unclear if there were prior arrests or domestic violence complaints filed against him, but this fits the behavioral pattern seen in many fatal domestic cases: escalation control, loss of influence, and retaliatory violence. It is important to note that abusive relationships rarely start as violent. They begin with subtle manipulation, isolation tactics, and emotional pressure. Over time, the abuser creates a reality where the victim feels trapped, confused, or responsible. For mothers like Destiney, especially those with multiple children, the barriers to escape are even higher. Economic dependence, fear of retaliation, housing instability, and social pressure can all serve as silent handcuffs. Kelvin and Destiney's relationship appears to have deteriorated significantly prior to the homicide. While she was working and raising her kids, he reportedly became increasingly aggressive in trying to insert himself back into her life. The day of the murder, April 7th, 2022, may have represented a tipping point. Destiney was found dead in her home after being shot multiple times. There were no public signs of break-in. Police believe she knew her killer. Kelvin fled the scene and was considered suspect shortly afterward. As of the latest available reporting, there is little documentation regarding Kelvin's arrest, prosecution, or sentencing. The lack of clarity around a case's legal outcome is not unusual in domestic homicide cases involving marginalized victims. This silence adds another layer of invisibility to Destiney's death. Why is it often difficult for victims to leave toxic or abusive relationships, especially when children are involved? In the weeks leading up to her murder, 33-year-old nurse and mother of 6, Destiney Jassmund Carey was in the process of rebuilding her life. According to local accounts and social media activity, Destiney had separated from her former partner, Kelvin, and was living independently with her children in Copperas Cove, Texas. The split was not amicable, but she had taken steps to protect her children and create a stable environment. This period of transition is often the most dangerous time for victims of intimate partner violence, as separation can trigger a heightened sense of control loss in the abuser. Destiney was working, supporting her children, and attempting to build long-term financial and emotional security. Friends and community members describe her as determined and private. Despite the hardship of raising 6 children alone, she made efforts to maintain normalcy. She was no longer under the roof of the man who had reportedly been controlling and possibly abusive, but the risk had not disappeared. If anything, it had increased. Kelvin's behavior in the days before the killing raised several red flags. While full surveillance records and police reports have not been made publicly available, information surfaced suggesting Kelvin may have been monitoring Destiney's movements. Whether through direct stalking, social media tracking, or using the children as leverage, it is likely he maintained indirect access to her life. There are no public details confirming a restraining order or police intervention, but stalking behavior often escalates without official documentation. This pattern is consistent with cases where the abuser refuses to accept the end of the relationship and begins to increase their efforts to reassert control, sometimes through intimidation, repeated contact, or surprise visits. Neighbors did not report disturbances prior to the shooting, but sources close to the family believe Destiney was trying to maintain distance. She may have underestimated the extent of the threat Kelvin posed. That miscalculation proved fatal. How do you recognize the escalation phase before domestic violence turns deadly? At approximately 12:25 p.m. on April 7, 2022, Copperas Cove Police Department received an emergency call about a shooting inside a residential home. When officers arrived at the scene, they discovered Destiney Jassmund Carey suffering from multiple gunshot wounds. Emergency services attempted to provide aid, but she was pronounced dead on the scene. The incident occurred inside her residence, a place presumed to be a safe environment for her and her 6 children. Authorities did not release specifics regarding the layout of the scene or the number of rounds fired, but the shooting appeared to be targeted, with no signs of break-in or forced entry. That opens a possibility that Kelvin either had a key, was let in, or was already inside the home prior to the incident. It remains unconfirmed whether any of the children were direct witnesses to the crime. However, given the time of day, midday during the week, it is plausible that at least one or more of the children were present or nearby. No reports detail whether they heard the shot, saw the shooter, or encountered Kelvin before he fled. Regardless, the trauma of losing a parent to gun violence inside the home will have long-term psychological effects. There were no indications of a physical struggle. No overturned furniture, broken items, or evidence of fight was mentioned in police dispatch summaries or public records. The murder appeared to be deliberate, sudden, and execution style. This fits the profile of a targeted domestic homicide, where the goal is not confrontation or argument, but the final act of silencing the victim permanently. Following the shooting, Kelvin reportedly fled the scene. It is unclear how long he remained at large, what mode of transportation he used, or whether he contacted anyone immediately afterward. There is no public confirmation of whether the firearm used was legally owned, stolen, or unregistered. The lack of those details also means it's unknown whether authorities had any prior knowledge of Kelvin owning or accessing a gun. Law enforcement issued statements identifying Destiney as the victim and stating that the investigation was ongoing. However, in the days that followed, very little information was released about the pursuit of Kelvin or any arrest. His name did not appear in local jail records at the time of media coverage. No trial dates, court appearances, or official charges were posted in publicly accessible databases. The silence surrounding the aftermath of the crime suggests either a slow-moving legal process or a breakdown in public transparency. This delay leaves questions unanswered and raises concerns about whether justice is being pursued actively. What security measures or support systems can realistically protect women when the threat is coming from someone they know? What would you do differently if a friend or a loved one was in a similar situation? Are current restraining orders and protection mechanisms enough when threats are subtle but deadly? What changes must be made in policy, law enforcement response, or community awareness to prevent similar killings? On April 7, 2022, at approximately 12:25 p.m., officers from the Copperas Cove Police Department were dispatched to a residence following reports of shooting. Upon arrival, law enforcement officers found 33-year-old Destiney Jassmund Carey, a mother of 6, unresponsive with multiple gunshot wounds. She was pronounced dead at the scene. The police quickly secured the area and began treating the location as a homicide scene. Crime scene tape went up. Standard protocols were followed. Witnesses were separated, nearby residents were questioned, and physical evidence was collected. According to official statements, investigators quickly identified the shooting as a suspected case of domestic violence. This determination was made based on the victim's prior history with her ex-husband, Kelvin, who was known to law enforcement and others as having a troubled relationship with Destiney. Police named Kelvin as the primary suspect early in the investigation. Despite having a named suspect in a confirmed homicide, there was no immediate arrest made. Kelvin was not taken into custody at the scene, and there was no information released indicating that he had turned himself in or been located in the following hours. The public was not informed about his whereabouts, and no details were given about whether a warrant had been issued for his arrest. Local news outlets reported the incident, but further updates regarding his apprehension or legal process were absent from the public domain. Additionally, there was no official mention of the weapon used in the murder being recovered at the crime scene. It remained unclear whether the gun used was registered, stolen, or illegally obtained. The absence of this detail left a gap in the public's understanding of how the crime was executed and whether there were prior indications that Kelvin posed a violent threat with access to firearms. As of now, there is no documented arrest report available to the public that confirms when Kelvin was apprehended, if at all. The timeline of police action following the homicide remains vague. There is no public record of a press conference or detailed briefing about the case from the Copperas Cove Police Department beyond the initial report confirming Destiney's identity and the date of her death. This lack of transparency raises several questions about police response and prosecutorial action. When a known individual is suspected of killing an ex-partner and a crime seen as evident and conclusive, why is there often a delay in executing an arrest? What investigative limitations or procedural barriers can stall justice even when the facts appear straightforward? When a suspect is known and a crime scene is clear, why are arrests sometimes delayed? Destiney's death left a significant and lasting void in the lives of her 6 children. With no mother and an absent or possibly fugitive father, these children were immediately placed in an uncertain and likely traumatic situation. At the time of her death, there were no public reports on the custody arrangements made for children, and no agencies publicly stepped forward to clarify who would care for them going forward. The community of Copperas Cove responded to tragedy with candlelight vigils and public mourning. Friends and supporters took to social media to share condolences and memories. Destiney's death resonated not only because of its violent nature, but because she represented a demographic that is often underrepresented in mainstream discussions of domestic violence. A working black mother trying to raise a large family while escaping a dangerous partner. Her name was later added to the National Gun Violence Memorial, where digital candles were lit and short messages of remembrance posted. Despite these efforts to keep her memory alive, coverage of the case did not expand beyond local news outlets and small online forums. There was no widespread media attention, no televised trials, and no consistent investigative journalism that followed up on the case weeks or months later. From a legal perspective, the outcome of this case remains unknown to the public. No trial record, court documents, or criminal proceedings were available in mainstream legal databases. Whether Kelvin was arrested, charged, or convicted is still unclear. If there was a trial or legal resolution, it occurred with no media oversight or public scrutiny. The absence of legal updates leaves unresolved questions about the effectiveness of law enforcement and the criminal justice system in this case. Were charges filed? Was Kelvin ever booked into jail? Was there a plea deal, or is the case still pending? These questions remain unanswered more than 2 years after murder. The psychological impact on Destiney's children also warrants examination. Witnessing or discovering the aftermath of a parent's murder by the other parent can cause deep and lasting trauma. Without information on their care or access to therapy and support, it is unknown how they are processing the event or being protected from further harm. Destiney's case is one of many in the United States that highlights a disturbing pattern. Domestic violence murders that receive limited media coverage, no legal transparency, and minimal long-term public attention. Despite the severity of the crime, it fades from headlines quickly, replaced by newer stories and fresher tragedies. The systems designed to protect vulnerable individuals, law enforcement, courts, media, often fail to follow through once the initial event passes. Why do so many domestic violence murder cases disappear from public attention after the initial headlines fade? One glaring failure in this case was a lack of early intervention. While detailed police records and protective orders related to this case are not publicly available, domestic violence experts say early intervention is often critical to prevent escalation. Many domestic violence homicides follow repeated threats, assaults, or stalking behaviors that go unaddressed by law enforcement or social services. There is no indication that Destiney received significant protective or legal support before her death. despite an allegedly volatile relationship with Kelvin. Early intervention requires law enforcement and social agencies to act decisively on reports of abuse, provide support resources, and monitor high-risk individuals. The absence of such measures creates dangerous windows for violence to occur unchecked. Protective orders, restraining orders, are a legal tool intended to create a safe distance between victims and abusers. In Destiney's case, there is no public confirmation that she had an active protective order against Kelvin. Whether due to legal hurdles, lack of awareness, or systemic barriers, many victims do not obtain protective orders or find them difficult to enforce. Without legal protection, victims remain vulnerable to direct contact, harassment, or violent attacks by their abusers. The failure to secure or enforce protective orders removes a critical layer of safety, especially in cases with known prior violence. Domestic violence cases often involve multiple police reports before a fatal incident occurs. However, police follow-up and investigation can be inconsistent. It is unclear if prior reports about Kelvin's behavior or threats against Destiney were filed, or if filed, whether they received adequate investigation. Failure to follow up on early warnings results in missed opportunities to intervene or remove dangerous individuals from the situation. The lack of visible evidence of such follow-up in this case raises questions about law enforcement responsiveness. Multiple social and legal systems are designed to protect victims: law enforcement, judicial systems, social services, and community organizations. The alleged killer, Kelvin, appears not to have been identified or treated as an imminent threat before the shooting. Systems may fail to recognize threats due to poor risk assessments, lack of communication between agencies, or systemic biases that underestimate danger, particularly in domestic violence contexts. This failure to acknowledge Kelvin's threat level meant no preventive measures, such as increased monitoring or firearm restrictions, were applied. Copperas Cove is a small city where social ties run deep and privacy is tightly held. Domestic violence in such settings can be harder to detect and address due to stigma, fear of gossip, or limited resources. Small towns may lack specialized services, shelters, and trained domestic violence advocates. Victims may be more reluctant to report abuse or seek help for fear of social reprisal. These factors compound to create environments where violence escalates behind closed doors with little external oversight. The firearm used in the shooting has not been publicly detailed, but its use raises critical questions about gun access. Texas has relatively permissive gun laws, with few restrictions on firearm ownership, even for individuals with a history of domestic violence unless a protective order or conviction exists. If Kelvin had no criminal record or protective order against him, it is likely he legally owned or acquired the weapon used in the shooting. This fact underscores the lethal intersection of firearms and domestic violence. Red flag laws or extreme risk protection orders allow family or law enforcement to temporarily remove firearms from individuals deemed dangerous. Texas did not have a statewide red flag law in effect at the time of the shooting, and there is no indication Kelvin was subject to any firearm restrictions. The absence of such legal mechanisms or their enforcement meant that Kelvin had unrestricted access to the gun used to kill Destiney, removing a critical opportunity to prevent the tragedy. If a victim does everything right, separates, seeks help, protects the kids, why does the system still fail to prevent murder? Despite the brutal nature of the crime and the fact that 6 children were left motherless, the murder of Destiney Jassmund Carey received minimal mainstream media coverage. The case was primarily discussed on social media forums and niche websites, with little or no national attention. Local news outlets reported on the incident, but the story quickly faded from public view. The lack of ongoing coverage or investigative journalism left the community and the nation uninformed about subsequent legal proceedings or justice outcomes. The case found a voice mostly on platforms like Facebook groups, Reddit, and specialized forums focused on domestic violence and Black victims of violence. While these discussions are important, they lack the reach and influence of mainstream media. Studies show that crimes involving Black women, especially domestic violence victims, are often underreported or receive less media attention compared to white victims or high-profile cases. This bias perpetuates systemic invisibility, denying victims and their families broader public empathy and justice advocacy. Destiney was a Black woman, and her story fits a disturbing national pattern of Black female victims being overlooked. The media's silence contributes to a cycle where their cases do not provoke policy change or public outcry, perpetuating systemic neglect. Months after the shooting, no updates on Kelvin's arrest, trial, or sentencing are publicly available. This lack of transparency leaves the case's resolution ambiguous and denies the public accountability in a matter of significant social concern. What role does media bias play in the lack of justice and visibility for Black women murdered by their partners? Destiney was a nurse, a mother of 6, and a woman who sought to provide for her family. She became a statistic in the ongoing epidemic of domestic violence fatalities in the United States. Her name is recorded in some victim memorials, but has yet to become widely known. Kelvin's status as the alleged shooter is reported, but no public court records or official trial updates have been released. It is unclear whether he has been charged, convicted, or remains at large. The murder left 6 children without their mother, facing immediate trauma and an uncertain future. There is no public information about their current guardianship, welfare, or support systems. Kelvin's access to a firearm was unrestricted, highlighting the ongoing crisis of gun violence tied to domestic abuse. The underlying domestic violence that precipitated this murder was left unaddressed by social, legal, and community systems. Without transparent legal proceedings or public updates, the true measure of justice in this case remains unknown. Why do you think this case never reached national headlines? What would justice look like in a case like this? Should all domestic violence relationships be monitored more aggressively after separation? How can we hold abusers accountable before they kill? This case underscores the tragic consequences when systems fail victims of domestic abuse, media neglects marginalized voices, and access to firearms remains unrestricted. Understanding these failures is critical to preventing future deaths and ensuring that victims like Destiney Carey do not fade into obscurity. If you found this story as gripping and heartbreaking as we did, don't forget to like this video and share it with others. And if you want to hear more true crime stories that uncover the mysteries behind these tragic events, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell. You won't want to miss our latest stories, updates, and discussions. Thank you for joining us on this journey to seek justice and explore the truth. Together, we can make a difference. Until next time, stay safe and stay aware.